HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
My guest today made a transition from finance into HR at a fast-growing tech company about 12 years ago. She overheard that there may be a position of HR opening up, the first ever position at this organization. And she reached out and stepped up and grew in that organization. Today, my guest Carla is going to share her philosophy on HR and what has guided her throughout her career. She is now the leader of people and culture at Squirrel. It's a massive tech company here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. So stay tuned as she shares her philosophy, her framework, and her journey. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Reitzma, the resident host of People Managing People. Welcome to the podcast. We're people managing people, and we want to lead and manage better. We're owners, founders, entrepreneurs. We're middle managers. We're team leaders. We're managing people, and yes, we do human resources. But we're not HR, at least not in the traditional sense. We're on a mission to help people lead and manage their teams and organizations more effectively. So if you want to lead and manage better, if you want to become a better organizational leader and more effective people manager, then join us. Keep listening to the podcast to find the tips, tricks, and tools you need to recruit, retain, manage, and lead your people and organization more effectively. And while listening to the show, please subscribe and join our mailing list on peoplemanagingpeople.com to stay up to date with all that's going on. Thanks for joining me today, Carla. I am so excited for you to come on the podcast and tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey through different technology companies. And I consider you a friend. We've worked together for a number of years, not anymore, but we did in the past. And so thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me and for this opportunity. I've never been on a podcast before, so this is an exciting new experience for me.
Well, you can add that to your resume or to your LinkedIn or whatever, whatever you think you need, where to put it. But, as we were prepping for this podcast and learning about your journey through the company we work together, as well as your transition to a different company, it's going to be a great conversation and a great, 30 minutes or, couple hours. We'll see what we record.
See where it goes.
So, I'd love to start off with you sharing a little bit about yourself,
Sure.
as well as maybe one of your core values.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm currently the director of people and culture at a company here in Burnaby called Squirrel. I just started 5.5 weeks ago, so I'm sort of getting my feet planted here, figuring things out. But it's a fantastic organization. Super excited to be a part of a people and culture team here. But I've been in the tech world for about 20 years. I've been in the HR people and culture world for about 12 years. So starting my journey at the tech company that you and I were working together at. My central core value is care. And it's about care for people, certainly, but also just about care for everything, for what you're doing, being mindful and being intentional in everything that you do.
I think that's just such an important value as somebody who is in a people and culture role. If you said you didn't care then about people, then we'd be having a different conversation.
For sure.
But, so you've been in technology for about 20 years, as you mentioned, and we worked together for about 8 years, but you were with that company, for 12 of your 20 years. So where did you start off? If it wasn't HR, where did you start?
So when I joined the tech company that we shared an experience at, I actually was hired into the finance department in an entry level role. So I was just trying to get my foot in the door into sort of the corporate world. And I knew I wanted an HR role eventually, but I was also simultaneously starting my education to get my certification in human rights management at BCIT at the time. So I started in a finance role. and the company was about 50 people at the time. They'd never had an HR person, still didn't. And most of the HR type functions were performed either by the controller, who I reported into, who was responsible for like payroll, benefits, a lot of that sort of stuff. And then each hiring manager kind of took care of their own, recruitment needs, managing their employee performance and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of wearing of many hats happening, which is typical for a tech and a startup company.
Yeah, I think we should dive into that a little bit and just paint that picture to put it into perspective. So the company, when you joined, was about 50 people. The company now is, hundreds and hundreds of people. It's a division of a Fortune 500 company now. So massive organization, and you had seen and were part of a lot of that growth. So, but what was it like early on in tech? So you started off in finance, but what was it like? You kind of alluded to it a little bit, where everyone took on a bit more responsibility, and how did that go? Did everyone buy into that?
Well, it was really distracting for all the managers because there wasn't really, a lot of clarity on how to go about things. Not a lot of processes were built out. A few, policies were in place, but, not a lot of consistency in the way that each manager was doing things, and no real sort of oversight into those processes and, strategizing from a people perspective. So, it was distracting. And the first thing that I jumped into was recruitment because the growth rate of the company was just incredible. And so there was constant, interviews and screening and all kinds of activities, reference checking and all that stuff that, takes a lot of time and was, needed some support for those managers who were going through that growth mode. So that was the first thing I stepped into. I kind of overheard them saying, "Oh, maybe we should get an HR manager, hire somebody to take care of this stuff." And, in my little corner, I said, "Hey, could you give me a shot at this? Could you let me kind of step up and help out with some of this stuff? And I'll keep doing my finance role, keep doing my AP and AR and the other things that I was hired for, but also take on, some of the recruitment activities." And that's kind of just how I got my foot in the door to become the HR person for the company. So
let me just get this straight, just for my own clarification, because I think it's a fascinating story of starting off at a tech company in finance, AR, AP. Overheard a conversation from one of the founders or one of the executives saying, "I think we need to hire for HR because, well, the company was growing hand over fist, rapid growth in people and revenues." What would happen if you didn't hear that conversation?
I don't know what would have happened. I suppose I could have, pursued the path of finance and grown my career within finance. I don't know how long I would have enjoyed that for. I do like some aspects of finance, but I probably would have hopped over to another company at some point once I'd finished my education at BCIT and started looking elsewhere.
Well, I think, and that's an unofficial takeaway from this podcast is if you're a founder, your company is growing, you need help in certain areas. You may actually have people on the team who are passionate about their role, but may have a different passion that they want to pursue, and put it out to the team, not have a conversation by the water cooler that, in your case, you overheard and you jumped on it. And so you jumped in this opportunity. You knew that you wanted to pursue HR, and was the only need in the organization at that time of 50 people just purely recruiting, or were more opportunities really uncovered as you grew into that position?
Yeah, no, there were tons of opportunities. I'd say, the next biggest thing, once I kind of started wearing that hat to some degree, and some of the team members within the company started to see me as sort of the go-to HR person, even though, by title I was not yet the HR person. But they started, asking me questions like, when's my performance review going to happen? I was supposed to have one, last year, but it still hasn't happened. And, what's the deal with that? And so, I started digging in and, trying to find the records of, when were the last performance reviews and how was it managed and what did the form look like? And, tried to start pulling those documents together. And then, from there, proposing a new system, of, tracking, monitoring, managing performance, which evolved several times, through the years after that, just as we grew and learned, and I grew as an individual. So that was a huge part of it was, I was taking my education at the same time. So as I'm learning, in the classroom, I could take that learning and just apply it right away to what I was doing and add new ideas along the way. So it was a really great opportunity for me, and I think advantageous for the company as well.
Well, I think you highlight a really interesting point, and that's around how people started coming to you and asking these questions. When is my performance review? When is this happening? How do I find out information about our benefits? And I've talked to founders and leaders in organizations who don't have HR, but your people are asking for these things. People are asking and want and crave these check-ins and performance reviews and a bit of structure around the human side of work. So effectively, you came in from ground zero and had to start from, I think there was a little bit of a foundation, but really start from scratch when it comes to managing people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. There was definitely some structure. I mean, there were some really smart people who created that company, as you know. So they had a lot of great ideas, and they had, some things in place that were working. And I think they were working good enough, but without having somebody who was kind of owning the people and culture, the HR function. It was really just sort of a piecemeal, like sort of bits and pieces pulled together to create, the basic needs being covered. And, those basic needs were taken care of, payroll benefits, they existed there. There was a performance management, form that had been outlined by somebody, and, there was an employee handbook. So there were some pieces in place already, but it was sort of who's looking over the whole thing and seeing how it fits together, and sort of shepherding the whole employee experience.
Well, I think that's another good point, right? It doesn't necessarily all fall on HR's responsibility, especially in the early days. There still is need for tracking vacation and sick days and benefits and everything else that goes along with that. So, it's important to have some structure around that. But having a dedicated HR person or people and culture person, it streamlines a lot of that process, and it directs people to one person. And so, you'd mentioned, and I caught it, about hierarchy of needs, or basic needs. We talked offline about this, about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so I think you've adapted one over the years for HR. And can you share that with us?
Yeah, no, I love this, and I can't take credit for creating it, because I saw another HR leader who presented this, but when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me, and it just really resonated. And I've kind of adapted it to be my own philosophy on HR and people and culture. So yeah, it's just like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, where you have the basic function, basic needs of, we need food and water. And then the next layer up is, we need shelter. And then the next layer up is we need connection with people. And, you get all the way to the top peak of the self-actualization. So, for me, the basic core functions, that foundational level of HR, are things like payroll, benefits. You need processes around recruiting. You need, contract templates. You need onboarding process outlined. You need an HRIS of some, iteration. And so, it's those non-negotiables that if you don't have these things, like if you don't pay people, that's a problem. So it's that, foundational level where you start to build the trust with employees. Like you have an agreement. If you do this work, we pay you X number of dollars. And, if we don't pay you, then you're going to lose trust. And so, there's the functionality of that. And then there's also the mechanisms to deal. We're all humans, payroll errors happen. So how do we deal with payroll errors in a way that's not going to lose that trust, that we take it seriously, that we fix it as soon as possible, and building out, the functions around those core areas. So that's the foundation. And then the next area we get to move up to, when we have those things established, is what I call team member advocacy. And this is things like employee relations, that employees have a safe place they can come to when they have, a concern where they think, I don't know that this is quite right, or a question, or a conflict with when they're coworkers or their manager, that there's a place, a repository for that, information and that assistance and support for individual team members. And that's where you look at things like employee engagement, and how do you, measure that, and how do you, use the information you measure to make changes and to ensure that your team members are going to be, happy to stay with the company and recommend, others to join and make that magnet organization that everybody wants to create, as well as developing our team members. So, really looking at how do we, assess our team members' strengths. What are those strengths, and how can we leverage them? So that's kind of the activities that happen at that level. And then the next level up is what I call leader advocacy. And this is where not only as individual contributors, but as managers, as supervisors, as directors and people managing people, or even managing managers, how do we make those leaders effective in their jobs? How do we get them the right skill sets that they need to be able to coach their team? And we can coach them as well. If you've built that trust level, that you can actually, be that advisor, at that leadership level. And help with things like workforce planning, strategizing a little bit from that management level. And then at the top of the peak, we see business partnership. And this is, truly like the pinnacle where, you can have the biggest impact on the business by being a participant in, building the culture of the company, strategizing, with the other leaders of the business in the future of the company and the growth strategy and long-term vision. So, throughout all of that whole, hierarchy, we build trust the whole way up. And if you break trust at one of the levels below, then you have to start again and you have to build your way back up again. And then the other component is just that through that whole process, you always need to have your values central to everything that you do. So you kind of become the shepherd of the values in that way as well. So that's a little synopsis of my philosophy on HR and people culture.
I was feverishly taking notes, and maybe that's a little selfish of me, as I shared with you, and I started in a new position, a new role as a director of people with in the nonprofit sector, and effectively, I compare us to a startup. We're creating awesome community engagement and around youth mental health. And the organization's been around for a while, but it's pivoting and it's changing. And everything you mentioned about payroll and team member advocacy, leader advocacy, and business partnership, culture strategy, it's everything that's come up, in this past week. But you mentioned something that's key to everything, and that's trust.
Yeah.
So, how do you build trust? I know this isn't on our pre-script, so I'm throwing this at you, and I hope it's okay. But in your experience, how does one build trust from an HR perspective or in general?
Yeah, I think for me, building trust really starts from giving trust. Believing that the person sitting across from you has the best intentions, assuming best intentions. And then just being open, be vulnerable, be willing to share, failures, successes, everything along the way. And listen. That's the other thing and I think that's, for me is my strength, and where my care shows up is, listen like you care, and not even like, I would say even a next level up, like listen because you care, like really genuinely care about what the person is saying in front of you. And then, and then they'll feel that they'll say, wow, I really felt heard by this person. And then even if you end up in a place where you disagree on a topic, they'll know that, well, at least I know I was heard by that person, and they can accept whatever the decision is a little bit easier when they know they've been heard. So that's my approach off the cuff.
Off the cuff, and I can attest to that. After knowing you for over 10 years, you give trust and you genuinely care, and that comes out as your core value. And so
Thank you.
You're living that. You're living that. So, but I'm curious. So let's say, a small team is listening, or a founder of a small company is listening to this, and they decide, okay, I need to appoint somebody as HR, right? We don't have necessarily budget to bring somebody on, but I need to make it part of somebody's task. So they pick somebody in the organization, or somebody volunteers. Is the best approach to then send an email and saying, hey, you can now confide in this person? Or is it more than that? Is it more than just, appointing somebody to become that HR advocate?
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I think certainly giving that person support, whether it's an email announcement or, at an all hands meeting or something, saying, hey, listen, so-and-so has decided, that they're going to accept this responsibility for the company, and they're now going to be sort of in charge of these functions. So please consider them your go-to on all these topics, and give that support and buy-in is definitely part of it. I think a lot of it's going to be on the individual to start building those relationships. So setting them up first for success is probably a really key thing. And then, just making sure that you pick that person with the right strengths, who is, motivated, who, is driven by relationship building, and, that they're going to be interested in that, line of their career, that they're going to want to create those relationships long term with people. I think that's probably a good start. But it's going to be a lot on the individual, just starting to build their own connections with the partners that they're supporting.
So in other words, a lot of coffee.
Sounds good.
Coffee. Hey, let's force. I'm going to force you to come drink coffee. No, it's. I say that jokingly, sort of, but it's really that setting up that one-on-one time. Whether
it is, yeah. I started my role here just 5.5 weeks ago, and the first thing I did was, I set up meeting times with every leader in the organization, and I. In that first meeting, I asked them, would you be okay if I set up a regular recurring one-on-one for us, so that we can, just have a touchdown point, stay, attuned of what's going on with each other. And, we'll see each other in between. We'll, have hallway conversations, maybe, not at this exact moment in time, but, that despite that we have a time that we can connect, and, I never had a single person say, no, I don't want to do that. So I don't know what I would have said if that had come up, but now I've got recurring meetings, and because I'm now into, the second month here, some of those meetings are starting to come around. And so I'm having those sit down discussions, and you can tell, some people are like, I don't really know what the point of this is. Like, what is the objective intention of this meeting? And so that's usually where I start, is just say, listen, the intention of this meeting is for us to have a touchdown point, for us to share ideas, for me to share information that I think might be useful to you. As a member of the executive leadership team, I might have, information or that can be communicated that would be interesting to you, just from having that ear to the ground. And so it goes really well. And so when I started this, and it was a colleague of ours who made this suggestion a few years back to have these regular one-on-one meetings, and I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to possibly find time to meet with every leader? But she sort of prodded me, encouraged me in the right way, and I did it. And so, by the end of it, I had of my time at the last organization, I had people saying, you know what, I really look forward to these meetings that we have. And, that was super, super gratifying. But it's really about creating that time, creating that space, and the frequency that you have regular connections. It's not just like, oh, let's go see HR now that we have a problem. It's, let's talk proactively. Let's plan together. Let's brainstorm. Let's share ideas and, have fun with it. Rather than it being like okay, there's a problem. Let's go talk to HR. So that's.
It's bringing, I had a conversation with somebody recently about bringing the human back to human resources. And it's just that, right? I think the basics, like you said, we need to get payroll and benefits and those fundamentals right. And then, but that also has a human component to it. And we only know what people need, or their what their needs are, and what areas that we can help support, is by having conversation and sitting down and driving that. Because I'm sure you've learned things in your one-on-ones that helped influence the executive team, whether it's at your new role, or I definitely know at your previous role, sitting down with people, and more than just reviewing, KPIs and goals and, how many sales did you close this month? It's, no, let's sit down on a personal level.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times it's about, making connections between others. Like sometimes I have a one-on-one with one individual, and I'm like, hey, have you talked to so-and-so about this? Because they're thinking the same thing. You guys should get together and, work on this together instead of duplicating, the efforts. So there's always opportunities that come up like that. That's, chances to make connections between others, to hear, kind of the scoop, what's happening on the front lines, what's happening in a particular team. It's a great way to just kind of stay with your ear to the ground and keep a pulse on things as well.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile resource. A director or leader of people is a worthwhile investment in any organization. And so, we've kind of talked about your career, and overheard a conversation. You started off as a team of one, helped build that team. I think, that organization, at least this division, was, 300-400 people when you'd left, and are now working at a new organization as a leader of people and culture. So, I'm super excited for your journey. And as, our listeners might be thinking about, okay, so Carla, you are super convincing. You've convinced me to go and hire for HR. What's one or two or three takeaways our listeners can take away, as they may be thinking about bringing on an HR resource?
Yeah, I think, one of the things we talked about early on is, looking within your organization. If there are people, who are interested, who want to step up and want to lead their career in the direction of people and culture, like what better way to keep good people than to let them leverage their strengths and, follow their ambitions. So I think, letting people step up to the plate is a huge thing. And then trust them and empower them. I think that's, a huge thing, especially for sort of the entrepreneurial startup type of places. We're talking about people who've started a company and it's their baby. They've created everything that exists, in the formulation of this organization. And so it's hard for them to just kind of step aside and let somebody, step up to the plate and take over, telling people, okay, this is how the performance management process is going to go, or this is what the new recruitment requirements are going to be, or here's the strategy for people and culture, and of course they want to have a say and have participate. Like that's of course it's a partnership. It's not just okay, you've hired a people and culture person. Now they get to do whatever they want. But there's got to be a balance. There's got to be some empowerment. Let them experiment. Let them, do what they feel is right. Especially if you trust the person that you've hired into the position, whether it's internal or external. So that would be sort of one major thing. The other thing I would say is, focus on one thing, at a time. It's really easy to, think of a gazillion great ideas, and you can't do it all. There's always more good ideas than there is time to get them done. I can't remember who I'm quoting, but I've heard that one, and I absolutely believe it, that it's harder to say no to things, to determine what you're not going to do. And so if you can just focus and look at like, what is the most impactful thing that I can do as it relates to people and culture right now, get that thing done, get it up and running, and then you pick the next thing and you move on, and then eventually that pile does, diminish, and you suddenly look back and go, wow, we've got a whole, people culture function now. This is really, really great. So that's, and then just sticking back to my little, model there, build the foundation and then move upwards, make sure you're building trust along the way. And then, eventually you get to that pinnacle there where there's strategy and culture movement and all that kind of stuff. So, and then one more thing, stay true to your values. That's 4 tips. But, I think getting aware of what your values are, what do you really, really value in the behaviors, in the attitudes of the people that you want to have in your organization, and then integrate that into everything you do, hire and fire based on your values, like hold true to them in everything that you implement. That's probably my biggest top tip.
Wow. I'm a little bit speechless, because again, this just applies to what I'm working on even this week. And so it's kind of reassuring, it's just focus on one thing at a time. There's no shortage of great ideas within organizations. But I love what you said, look within your organization. If you're looking at an HR resource, whether maybe you've already have a team and you're looking to expand it, take a look inside and trust and empower. Micromanaging is it's just kills everything. It kills every good idea, in my opinion. And focus on one thing and root it in values and behaviors. That's great. And then, your model, I think, we'll have to get you to write a blog post in the future just to, to explain that in a little bit of detail. But I really appreciate that. I think you've had a pretty amazing journey from finance into HR and now leading people and culture at a really large organization. So it's been a pleasure to watch your journey. And thank you for coming on, Carla.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's, I've been really fortunate. Things have gone right for me along the way. I've had opportunities put out for me and I've grabbed onto them and rolled with them. But yeah, there's definitely been a lot of support along the way. This has been great. It's always great to connect with you, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So, one last thing before we wrap up, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about your people management, you might have a Carla inside your organization already. And so put it out there. You never know. You may have a rock star who's just waiting for that opportunity. And So with that, thank you again, Carla, for coming on, and thanks for those who are listening. We'd love to hear your feedback. Please reach out on LinkedIn or via peoplemanagingpeople.com. And as always, we'd love for you to subscribe and to our podcast. So with that, I hope everyone has a great day.